January 26, 1945. The frozen countryside near Holtzwihr, France. Amid smoke and confusion, something unimaginable unfolded. One lone American soldier stood atop a flaming tank destroyer, single-handedly halting an entire German company's advance. The elite Alpine troops of the 2nd Gaybergs Division, battle-hardened veterans redeployed from Norway for this assault, were being stopped cold by what looked like a boy who could barely weigh 50 kilograms. Behind the German front, 6 armored beasts, Panzer IVs and tank destroyers that had crushed resistance throughout Europe, sat motionless, their commanders stunned and unwilling to move forward without infantry support that was being methodically wiped out by one determined American. The 250 men of the reinforced German company had stumbled into what Wehrmacht doctrine declared impossible, a single soldier holding ground against a full combined arms offensive. The numbers were grim. 40 exhausted Americans stood against 250 elite German mountain troops and 6 tanks. Every rule of warfare predicted that the American line would crumble within minutes. Instead, for one astonishing hour, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy rewrote the very logic of combat. That path to the blazing tank destroyer began far away in the cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas, where Audie Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, to poor sharecroppers. The 6th of 12 children, Murphy grew up surrounded by hardship and duty. His father walked out when Audie was 12. His mother died of illness in 1941, leaving the 16-year-old to care for his younger siblings. "If I miss what I'm aiming at, my family doesn't eat tonight," young Murphy once told neighbor Monroe Hackney, explaining his uncanny accuracy. He could drop a rabbit on the run at 50 yards with a .22 rifle most couldn't hit a barn with. Every bullet cost money the family didn't have. Every miss meant hunger. Under that pressure, Murphy developed an eye for shooting that would later terrify enemy soldiers across Europe. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, he saw his way out. The military meant steady pay, regular meals, and a chance to send money home. But enlisting proved harder than fighting. At 5 feet 5 and just 110 pounds, Murphy was turned away by both the Marines and the Navy for being too small. Even the paratroopers refused him. Finally, the regular Army infantry accepted him on June 30, 1942, thanks to his sister Corinne, who falsified papers claiming he was 18. Private First Class David Mouse McClure, who trained with him at Camp Walters, Texas, later said, "We thought he was our mascot at first, this kid who looked 14 and weighed nothing. The drill sergeants never let up, always calling him baby. But there was something about his eyes. When he took position on the firing range, those blue eyes turned cold as winter." He didn't miss. Not once Murphy's shift from Texas farm boy to lethal warrior began during the July 1943 invasion of Sicily. Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, landed near Licata as part of Patton's 7th Army. In those Sicilian mountains, Murphy made a haunting discovery. He was remarkably good at killing. His rural childhood had taught him stealth, cover, and precision. Near Palermo, when his unit was pinned down by machine gun fire, Murphy flanked the enemy, killed the crew with grenades, and turned their own weapon against retreating Germans. Captain Paul Harris nominated him for the Bronze Star, writing, "This soldier shows a natural instinct for battle that's extraordinary for one so young." Italy changed Murphy from a good soldier into a legend. At the Volturno River in October 1943, he held off a German counterattack alone after his squad was wiped out. Borrowing a sniper rifle, he killed 5 enemy soldiers from over 300 yards. For that action, he earned the Distinguished Service Cross. Staff Sergeant William Paulson later described Murphy's approach to combat. Murphy didn't fight with rage. That was what made him so terrifying. He fought with cold precision, every move deliberate, like solving a calculation. Spot a German, eliminate him, move to the next target. No anger, no hesitation, just mechanical, lethal focus. At Anzio, that nightmarish beachhead Churchill once called the Wildcat, Murphy earned his first Silver Star by taking out a German tank with a bazooka at almost point-blank distance. By the time of the southern France landings in August 1944, Murphy had already survived Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and Rome. He'd been wounded twice, decorated repeatedly, and had built a reputation, on both sides of the lines, as someone you didn't want to face. During the advance through southern France, when his lieutenant was killed in an ambush near Montélimar, Sergeant Murphy stepped up and assumed command. With just 18 men, he organized a defense against a German company more than 5 times their number, holding a vital crossroads for 2 hours and personally accounting for 15 enemy soldiers. His leadership earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant on October 14, 1944. By January 1945, as Company B moved toward the Colma Pocket, Murphy was no longer the young, wide-eyed recruit of 1942. Combat had aged him far beyond his 19 years. Most of his original comrades were dead or wounded, and he himself had killed over 100 enemy soldiers. The Colma Pocket was the embodiment of winter warfare's horror, a vast German bridgehead west of the Rhine, covering some 850 square miles. It was the Wehrmacht's last stronghold on French soil, and Hitler had ordered it defended to the last man. The Germans reinforced it with their toughest surviving units, including the 2nd Mountain Division, troops trained in Norway for snow combat. For Company B, the situation was dire. In just 5 days of fighting before January 26th, they had lost 102 men to wounds, with every officer except Murphy either killed or evacuated. From a company that once numbered 187, only 40 soldiers remained capable of fighting. Murphy himself was carrying a leg wound from shrapnel sustained 2 days earlier, though he never mentioned it. Private Anthony Abramsky later described what they were facing. "We were finished, done for. Most of us hadn't slept in 3 days. We'd been surviving on cold K rations when we could eat at all. Half the men had frostbite. Our machine guns froze up. We spent the night trying to dig foxholes, but the ground was like stone. When daylight came and we saw our positions, spread out along the forest's edge with nothing but open ground ahead, we knew we were sitting ducks." January 26, 1945, dawned grey and bitterly cold. The temperature hovered around freezing, with wind that sliced through heavy coats. Snow was piled 3 feet deep in places, though constant artillery had churned much of it into a frozen wasteland of mud and ice. Company B clung to their positions along the edge of the Bois de Riedvier forest, staring across nearly a mile of open field toward the German-held village of Holtzwihr. Murphy had arranged his battered company as best he could. 2 M10 tank destroyers were his only anti-tank assets. The infantry line was stretched dangerously thin along the tree line. His command post sat in a shallow drainage ditch that offered some shelter and a decent view of the open terrain ahead. Field telephone lines linked him to the artillery batteries behind them, his one real hope of stopping what was coming. The German assault began with a thunderous artillery barrage at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Shells burst in the treetops, raining shrapnel down over Company B's lines. The bombardment lasted 30 minutes, though to the men pinned in the frozen ground, it felt endless. At 2 o'clock, the enemy appeared. Private First Class Donald Ekman was the first to spot them. You could see the little flags on the German tanks, 6 of them, spread in attack formation, and behind them, Jesus, there must have been 250 infantry, all in white snowsuits, gliding across that field like ghosts. Murphy's first move was to call in artillery support. But even he knew artillery alone wouldn't be enough to stop this. The Germans were spread wide, too many, and moving far too fast. At 600 yards, the M10 tank destroyers opened fire. Their first rounds went high. The crews were numb with cold and exhaustion. German return fire came instantly, brutal and precise. An 88mm shell slammed straight into the rear M10's turret. The vehicle erupted in flames as its crew scrambled out and sprinted for the tree line. The forward M10 tried to reposition for a better angle, but the frozen ground betrayed it. The tracks slipped sideways into a drainage ditch, locking tight in the ice. The crew abandoned it and fled. By around 2:20 p.m., with both tank destroyers knocked out and German troops closing to within 200 yards, Murphy made the decision that would etch his name into history. He ordered his remaining men to pull back into defensive positions inside the woods, but he himself stayed behind. Instead of retreating, Murphy dashed through exploding shells toward the burning M10. The vehicle was engulfed at the rear, where the 88mm round had ignited its fuel and ammunition stores. Black smoke billowed into the air. The heat was so intense it could be felt from 30 feet away. At any second, the remaining rounds inside could detonate, turning the wreck into a bomb. Murphy climbed onto the fiery machine and gripped its .50 caliber M2 Browning. From that height, he had a commanding view of the advancing German lines, but he was completely exposed. One small figure stood silhouetted against the grey sky, his only cover the smoke curling up from the inferno beneath him. Private First Class Anthony Abramsky watched from the woods. "I saw Lieutenant Murphy climb onto that burning tank destroyer while the air was alive with machine gun bursts," he said. "Pistol rounds from the German infantry pinged off the hull and tracks. It was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed." The M2 Browning was a monstrous weapon in trained hands. It spat 550 rounds per minute, with lethal accuracy out to 2,000 meters. Its heavy bullets shredded armor and bodies alike. In Murphy's control, it became an instrument of surgical destruction. For the next hour, he fired the weapon with terrifying precision. Between bursts, he kept his field telephone line open, calling artillery strikes almost on top of his own position. The synchronized fury of his gunfire and the artillery he directed built a wall of metal no German infantry could cross. Sergeant Elmer Brawley, observing from the tree line, recalled, "The Germans got within 10 yards of Murphy. He shot them in the ditches, the fields, the woods, anywhere they showed themselves." The bitter cold and frozen ground made his stand even more astonishing. The earth was too hard to dig into, and the shifting clouds made visibility unpredictable. Weapons jammed from frost, and men fought through numb hands and open wounds. Murphy, though, used every advantage. The M10's elevated position gave him a wide arc of fire over the open terrain, and the .50 caliber's range allowed him to strike at maximum distance. The dense smoke from the burning wreck made German return fire wildly inaccurate. The attackers found themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own tactics. Their tanks, expecting to crush the battered American line, couldn't move forward without infantry support, and that support was being torn apart by Murphy alone. Wehrmacht doctrine relied on coordinated attacks, but without their foot soldiers shielding them, the tanks had no choice but to pull back rather than risk destruction. Technical Sergeant Morris Wald, watching through binoculars from battalion command, later testified, "Murphy's fire was unbelievably accurate. He wasn't wasting rounds. Every burst was deliberate. I saw him drop an entire squad that tried to circle around us." Around 3 p.m., after 40 minutes of non-stop firing, his ammunition began to dwindle. The gun barrel glowed cherry red, and the burning M10 beneath him was slowly sinking as its tracks and wheels melted away. German soldiers were now within 10 yards of his position. Private Charles Owen later remembered, "We could hear the lieutenant's .50 caliber slowing down. He was almost out of ammo. The Germans must have realized it too, because they started charging." Murphy grabbed his carbine and began dropping them one after another. Around 3:10 p.m., with his ammunition nearly spent and enemy soldiers closing to within 10 yards, he made the most desperate call of the entire fight. He ordered the artillery to fire directly on his position. Lieutenant Walter Weispfennig, the forward observer, initially refused, knowing it would mean Murphy's death. But Murphy insisted, "That's a direct order." Fire on my position. Now the first shells landed less than 50 yards away, tearing up frozen ground and throwing shrapnel in all directions. German infantry caught in the open were ripped apart, but Murphy, still exposed on the flaming M10, was also in the blast zone. Shrapnel tore through his leg, his second wound that day. Still, he kept firing the last rounds he had. The combined fury of his machine gun and the artillery barrage finally shattered the German assault. The remaining infantry, perhaps 100 men, began retreating toward Holtzwihr. Their tanks, now without infantry cover and taking increasingly accurate fire, reversed and pulled back. At roughly 3:20 p.m., after an hour of relentless combat, Murphy climbed down from the blazing M10. His uniform was singed, his leg bleeding from shrapnel wounds. Behind him, the tank destroyer kept burning, finally erupting in an explosion 10 minutes later. The scene before him was grim. German bodies were scattered across the snow-dusted fields. Historians estimate at least 50 dead and many more wounded. The survivors were in full retreat, their officers unable to rally them. Murphy walked back toward the woods where his men waited. Private Abramsky recalled, "He was calm, scary calm. He asked if anyone had been hit by our artillery, checked everyone over, then just sat down, lit a cigarette, like it was nothing. His hands didn't even shake. Perhaps the most striking thing about this event is how little exists from the German side. Despite extensive searches through German military archives, the Bundesarchive, and veteran associations, no first-hand German statements, no diaries, letters, or POW interviews about Murphy's stand have ever been found. That silence is remarkable, considering how violent and shocking the battle must have been for them. Several reasons help explain this gap. The German units suffered about 50 casualties from Murphy's defense alone, likely wiping out many eyewitnesses. Many division-level Wehrmacht records from this late stage of the war were destroyed. The swift German withdrawal after the failed assault, described in American reports as disheartened by their lack of progress, suggests a demoralized force unwilling to record what must have felt like a humiliating defeat. From surviving operational logs, historians have identified the participating German units, the 2nd Mountain Division as the main attacking force, supported by the 708th Volksgrenadier Division and the 285th Assault Gun Battalion. These were elite formations. The mountain troops especially were seasoned veterans of campaigns in Norway, Finland, and the Eastern Front, which made their failure against a single American soldier even more astonishing from a tactical standpoint. The 2nd Mountain Division's war diary for January 26th offers only a single clinical line. Attack on American positions near Holtzwihr repulsed with heavy casualties. Enemy resistance stronger than expected. That terse note hides the chaos that must have consumed their ranks. Soldiers who had faced brutal winters and fierce fighting across Europe had never witnessed anything like it. A lone defender who seemed utterly immune to fear, exhaustion, or even self-preservation. Years later, post-war German analysis included this engagement in their 1965 study Verteidigung gegen Überlegenheit, Defense against Superior Forces. That report identified several key reasons for their defeat. German analysis after the battle identified several key reasons for their defeat. Confidence rooted in sheer numbers, rigid tactics once the initial assault stalled, and the total breakdown of coordination between tanks and infantry. The enemy never launched another attack on Company B's position. That night, under cover of darkness, they abandoned the sector altogether. These elite mountain troops, brought all the way from Norway for this offensive, had never withdrawn in 4 years of war. Yet they fell back without direct orders from their corps commander. The psychological shock of being halted by a single American soldier struck harder than the physical losses. Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr carried consequences far beyond the immediate battle. his defense allowed the 3rd Infantry Division to hold the vital Bois de Riedvier forest, which commanded the main approach to Holtzwihr village. The German failure to break through sealed the fate of the Colmar pocket. Holtzwihr itself was liberated the next day, January 27, 1945, by the 30th Infantry Regiment. Within weeks, the entire German bridgehead west of the Rhine collapsed. Over 50,000 German troops were removed from the war, freeing Allied forces to push into Germany. The engagement proved that even Germany's most experienced formations could no longer overcome the willpower and discipline of the Allied infantry, no matter how outnumbered they seemed. General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, commander of the French First Army, later acknowledged the importance of the stand. The defense of the Holtzwihr, approaches by the American 3rd Division, and especially the extraordinary action of Lieutenant Murphy, broke the back of German resistance in Alsace. The lessons drawn from Murphy's defense, especially the power of integrating artillery and automatic weapons, shaped American tactical thinking for the rest of the European campaign. In recognition, the 3rd Infantry Division was awarded the right to wear the French Croix de Guerre. In 2000, a memorial was erected on the battle site so that future generations of French citizens would remember the young American who helped free their homeland. The official Medal of Honor citation, presented by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, serves as the military's formal record of Murphy's valor. Even in its restrained wording, the citation struggles to capture what truly happened that day. He stood alone, exposed to fire from 3 directions. His deadly accuracy killed dozens of Germans and broke their assault. For an hour the enemy threw everything they had at him, but he refused to give ground. The ceremony near Salzburg, Austria, gathered the surviving men of the 3rd Division to witness their comrade receive America's highest military honor. Brigadier General Ralph B. Lovett and Lieutenant Colonel Hallett D. Edson, who had both recommended him for the award, emphasized that Murphy's actions saved Company B from annihilation and allowed the division to hold key terrain. Throughout his life, Murphy resisted being called a hero. When asked why he climbed onto that burning tank destroyer, his answer was simple. They were killing my friends. It wasn't heroism. I just figured if one man could handle it, why risk others? After the war, Murphy faced another kind of battle, what was then called battle fatigue, now known as PTSD. His experience gave a human face to the unseen psychological cost of war. He suffered chronic insomnia, vivid nightmares, and constant hypervigilance. He often slept with a loaded pistol beneath his pillow and later moved into his garage, keeping the lights on because he couldn't bear the darkness that reminded him of combat. I remember it all like a nightmare. Murphy wrote, "It was as if some demon had taken control of me." His openness about these struggles helped lead to the creation of the Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio in 1973, 2 years after his death in a plane crash at age 45. Murphy's first marriage to actress Wanda Hendricks lasted only 16 months, destroyed by his PTSD-driven outbursts. She later said, "He was 2 different men. In daylight he could be warm, witty, and kind, but at night he became someone else." Murphy often prowled his home at night, pistol in hand, keeping watch as if the war had never ended. He'd sleep in the garage with the lights on, unable to face the darkness that reminded him of enemy patrols. Despite his inner turmoil, Murphy became one of the first public advocates for veterans coping with the invisible wounds of battle. In 1966, he wrote in the Saturday Evening Post, "I can't remember a time without nightmares. They're part of me now, like breathing. I'm fortunate. I can pay for doctors, medicine, and therapy. But what about those who can't? What about the thousands returning from Vietnam with the same demons?" Murphy's stunning effectiveness at Holtzwihr came from both his skill and his weapons. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun, designed by John Browning in 1918, was among the finest heavy machine guns of the Second World War. Its .50 BMG rounds could pierce an inch of steel at 100 yards, delivering over 13,000 foot-pounds of energy per shot, enough to tear through armor or flesh alike. The M10 tank destroyer he fought from carried 51 3-inch shells, 1,000 .50 caliber rounds, and 300 gallons of gasoline. When an 88mm German shell hit, it ignited the fuel, turning the vehicle into a blazing inferno that reached over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The fact that it burned for an hour without exploding defied belief. Murphy was effectively standing atop a live bomb. Equally vital was the artillery he commanded. The 105mm howitzers supporting him could hurl 33-pound explosive shells more than 11 kilometers. Each detonation produced a lethal shrapnel zone 2 football fields wide. Murphy's ability to bring that fire to within 50 yards of his own position, danger close by any measure, multiplied his firepower far beyond what one man could normally achieve. Military analysts later tried to estimate his odds of survival. Facing roughly 250 German infantrymen with rifles and machine guns, plus 6 tanks, more than 10,000 rounds were fired in his direction during the hour-long battle. Even accounting for range and poor visibility through the smoke, statistics say he should have been hit between 15 and 20 times. Operating the M2 Browning under such conditions was brutally demanding. The gun itself weighed 84 pounds and kicked like a sledgehammer. Murphy had to steady himself on a burning, shifting tank destroyer while absorbing its recoil. Breathing smoke, eyes stinging, the air filled with tracers and shrapnel. Historians and psychologists have long asked what made him capable of such relentless action. Was it the harshness of his upbringing that taught him endurance? His years of hunting that made deadly precision second nature? Or simply the circumstances of that desperate hour? Dr. Dave Grossman, author of On Killing and a leading expert on combat psychology, offered an explanation. Murphy was the perfect storm. His childhood gave him toughness, his hunting gave him skill, and his loyalty to his men overrode his instinct for self-preservation. Murphy's own words confirm this. Whenever people asked why he climbed onto that flaming tank destroyer, his reply never changed. They were killing my men. It wasn't about tactics or glory. It was personal. He understood how battle had transformed him. In a 1968 interview, just 3 years before his death, he reflected, "People call that day heroic. Maybe it was, but I became something inhuman, a machine built only to kill. I felt no fear, no anger, just a cold determination to destroy." Audie Murphy remains the most decorated combat soldier in American history. He earned every Valor Award the U.S. Army could give, some twice. His 33 medals included the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts, along with 5 foreign decorations from France and Belgium. Yet Murphy's deepest legacy isn't in his medals, it's in his advocacy. Decades before PTSD was a recognized term, he fought for better mental health care for veterans. The Audie L. Murphy Memorial FAF, the hospital, now specializes in treating psychological wounds of war. His memoir, To Hell and Back, has offered hope to thousands of veterans, reminding them they are not alone. Murphy's name has become a cornerstone of U.S. Army tradition. The infantry school still uses his stand at Holtzwihr as a case study in defensive tactics, leadership under fire, and the coordination of supporting arms. The prestigious Audie Murphy Club honors outstanding NCOS who embody his spirit of courage and compassion. As Master Sergeant Ronald Johnson, president of the Fort Hood chapter, put it, "Every generation of soldiers needs heroes, proof that ordinary people can rise to greatness. When history calls, Murphy proved to generations of soldiers that you don't need to stand 6 feet tall or come from a military dynasty to be a warrior. You just need to value your comrades' lives more than your own." Experts often debate whether Murphy's one-man stand could ever be repeated in modern warfare. Technology has transformed the battlefield. Satellites, drones, and precision weapons now expose every movement, making old-fashioned heroics seem impossible. Yet recent wars tell a different story. In Afghanistan and Iraq, American troops again witnessed individual acts of defiance that echoed Murphy's courage. Staff Sergeant David Balavia's brutal house-to-house fight in Fallujah and Sergeant First Class Paul Smith's final stand behind a machine gun in Baghdad both reflected that same refusal to yield. As General Stanley McChrystal, former head of Joint Special Operations Command, explained, "Technology changes how we fight, but not why we fight." War remains a struggle of wills. What Murphy showed at Holtzwihr, the decision of one man to say, "no further," that's eternal. At the U.S. Army's Maneuver Center of Excellence, Murphy's action remains a study in critical battlefield principles: the power of terrain, the coordination of supporting fire, and the psychological dimension of combat. Murphy understood that killing the enemy wasn't enough. He had to crush their will to advance. His steady, unrelenting fire convinced the Germans that to move forward was to die. While the world hailed him as America's most decorated soldier, the young Texan waged a different battle, the one inside his own mind. The man who had shown no fear atop a burning tank destroyer lived in dread of the darkness within. His wife, Pamela Murphy, who married him in 1951 and stayed by his side until his death 20 years later, offered rare insight. Audie carried invisible wounds that never healed. He'd wake up shouting, reliving battles long past, but he never stopped trying to help others. For Murphy, the war never truly ended, yet he turned that pain into purpose. His transformation from soldier to advocate brought lasting change. By speaking openly about what is now called PTSD, he helped the public and the military recognize that psychological trauma is a genuine injury, not a weakness or a failure of courage. His advocacy inspired countless veterans to seek help rather than suffer in silence. On January 26, 1945, 2nd Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy showed that one determined man could halt an army. His stand at Holtzwihr shattered Nazi assumptions about American soldiers. These weren't the soft men of propaganda. They were the sons of farmers and factory workers, shaped by poverty and struggle, who could fight with a ferocity equal to any in history when defending their brothers. The absence of German first-hand accounts about that day speaks volumes. In their silence lies the deepest form of defeat, not only tactical or physical, but moral. They had met someone who was simply better at war, and that realization broke something fundamental in their warrior identity. Today, the fields around Holtzwihr are peaceful again, fertile farmland where the wounds of war have long healed. Craters are gone, the blood washed away by decades of rain. Yet every January 26th, a small ceremony gathers at the memorial where Murphy stood his ground. French villagers, American veterans, and sometimes elderly Germans come together to remember the day one man proved that courage has no boundaries. Murphy's story reminds us that heroism isn't the absence of fear, it's action in spite of it. It's standing firm when retreat would be easier. It's becoming, if only for a moment, something greater than yourself. That's why the Germans were stunned when a lone American held off 250 men for more than an hour. They faced something no manual could predict, no doctrine could counter, no firepower could crush. The indomitable human spirit embodied in a 110-pound Texan who would rather die than see his friends fall. His stand at Holtzwihr endures as eternal proof that one person, in the right place, at the right time, with the right reason, can change the course of history. The boy who once hunted rabbits to feed his family became the man who stopped an army to save his friends. In war, as in life, that transformation, from ordinary to extraordinary, is the most profound truth of all.